The second day of Ivrovi, Crex Day, god of life, death, and fate, bringer of gentle passings and new beginnings. The afternoon air was crisp as Lamanna Davari escorted Lorem Raelin back to her car, all too aware of the questions left unasked and unanswered by Thomas Warwick. "Respectfully, Minister, if I might ask, why aren't you having a problem with this?" Davari asked. "The man is in direct contact with Princess Kalira, yet circumstantial evidence I'm only just now seeing, points to him having links to..." Davari stopped herself from using the word terrorist after watching Lorem's interview. "To certain parties of interest. While never charged, it was enough to place him under continual surveillance for years." Raelin chuckled. "Consider it a measure of our varied experience, Special Agent, but people are individuals within a greater whole. You have skill and experience. I have rather more." Raelin shrugged as they strolled through the commons. "While you're an invaluable agent, I am an administrator. You'd be surprised to discover just how much of my work entails dealing with fringe elements." The agent was still examining her, and she shook her head. "Agent Davari, your role requires you to see things in shades of grey, and you frequently do. In this case, consider that whatever else Tom Warwick was, or still is, he remains the product of a technological society. If he were illiterate and ignorant, he would be of no use to anyone, and certainly useless to us." Raelin stared at the bottom of her disposable cup, as if looking for tea leaves, but of course there were none. "I've understood for a long time just how difficult are the goals we've set for ourselves. It's not easy uplifting an entire galaxy. We've done our best, but not everyone has embraced that vision. People get left behind, and yes, sometimes they are even trampled under. Shall we look down on Thomas Warwick because he is a suspected killer? He's killed, certainly, or Princess Kalira would not be alive. At least if he's killed, it was on a personal level. Circumspect. Given his established history, he wouldn't be entirely unfair in claiming our conquest killed people indiscriminately, nor is he wrong that some elements within the Imperium took undue advantage. I know that wasn't what the Imperium wanted, and I certainly believe we averted their extinction. Significant damage at the least, but if we're going to give ourselves credit for what didn't happen, we have to accept we're complicit in the things that did, even if it was only because of our inability to prevent those nightmares." "That's not entirely fair, Minister," Lamanna said dourly. "Quite right. The Imperium's goals are just, and so that reproof is objectively unfair to us as individuals. Well, most individuals. But no one is ever just an individual. We're all members of a society, and that carries responsibilities, even for Mr. Warwick. That doesn't change when society places constraints on an individual. One does not have the right to shout fire in a crowd, that sort of thing. And so what? Even tighter constraints were placed upon Mr. Warwick." Raelin broke off to toss the empty teacup into a waste receptacle as they walked through the commons. "My point, Agent Davari, is that when people accept those constraints and forgive their own transgressions, then it behooves them to forgive others. I won't condemn Mr. Warwick for his suspected choices, if only because it's so easy to imagine how he might have made them. What matters are the choices we see him making around Princess Kalira right now. I spoke with Rebecca Irilon at the Ministry of Education yesterday, and I'm fully conversant with your reports. From all accounts, Warwick's adapting to life on Shill has been rather impressive. Mind you, I can't say I imagined the Academy could provide a cold-blooded killer for an educator, but then you haven't personally met Lady Wakama." Raelin turned as they reached her car and the door slid open, waving in what might have been a jaunty salute. "Do keep up the good work, Agent Davari." Pris rubbed her eyes. Everyone else in the firm had gone home, and she left with the last of them. Her room at the hotel was comfortable, and she barely remembered to order dinner. She'd wolfed it down when it arrived, shocked to realize how ravenous she was. The roast turox was outstanding. Say what you will about the town, but people here seem to know how to cook. Given how hard they worked, the extra calories were probably desperately needed. She's seen some women around town who could really stand to lose weight, and Kangshri was definitely pushing some extra pounds. But who could blame them with food this good? If only her case was going as well. The expansion plan for the city of Vardosh wasn't just local, it had imperial backing. In response to rising tensions, the Navy wanted to expand force projection operations deep along the periphery. That meant logistics, which meant supplies, which meant food, which meant a demand for Taurox. Lots and lots of Taurox. Feeding the Navy was just business as usual, but now fleets all around the core were either mobilizing or stocking up to push up their readiness. That meant supply freighters had started calling in large numbers, and there wasn't an end in sight. Plans had already been on file to expand the Vardosh starport for over a year, but the surge in demand was pushing it into execution now. The problem was that the original work had only abutted the Sasana ranch. Now the expanded plan to include even more freight yards, terminals and landing pads. It was ridiculous. No one needed that much Taurox, even the Navy. The extension would conscript the bulk of the ranch's lower pastures, lands they needed. It would kill the ranch. It was a cheap trick, calling in the ranch's debts out of cycle, but the foreclosure action wasn't the worst part. The worst part hadn't even been spending the afternoon fruitlessly calling barrister firms around the planet. Not that there had been that many, but none of them wanted to take on the case. No, the worst had come when she'd gone back into Kangshri's office earlier that day. By that time, she'd already been through the case file twice. The barrister had come back from lunch and strode toward her office with a nod to her clerk. "Miss Orion, no calls for the next 2 hours. I don't wish to be disturbed." "Miss Kangshri?" Pris had been waiting there by the door, unable to contain herself. "Please, I need a few minutes of your time." Kangshri paused, looking at Pris as she stood by her office door like something scraped off her boot. "Miss Tassain, is it?" "Yes, ma'am," she said imploringly. "I have to talk to you." "Your use of 2 imperatives in under a minute shows they're becoming lamentably overused these days." The woman raised an eyebrow. "You are already making use of my offices without notice. If you want to make use of my time, you can talk to Miss Orion and make an appointment." "But ma'am, it's an emergency," she said, as Kangshri pressed by, stepping into her office. With foreclosure on the Sasana properties set for the end of Evrovi, time was running out. "Students always think so," Kangshri said scathingly, jutting her tusks. "That's one of the reasons you are sent on internships, to learn the difference between illusion and reality." "If I could just have 10 minutes of your time, ma'am, "Priscilla, that's enough," Vonda Orion growled. The woman spent most of her time playing Galaxy Conquest, but whatever else could be said about the office clerks, they guarded their barristers' offices like Rabbit Grinshaw. Kangshri was already walking back inside. "You have 5 minutes." Pris had taken the win, rushing in behind with barely a moment to give Vonda an apologetic look as she closed the door behind her. Kangshri settled behind her desk and she stood there awkwardly. Kangshri hadn't invited her to sit, and she stood in front of the desk, feeling like she was 6 years old again. She tried to form her thoughts, but "You are wasting your allotted time, Mr. Sane," she said, folding her hands over her stomach. "Yes, ma'am. That is, I need your advice, please." Kangshri leaned back in her chair, peering at her. "I presume your request is beyond the scope of your internship with my firm?" "Yes, ma'am. I need the name of a good barrister on Willist." Pris fumbled. Kangshri's firm, the Legal Pioneers, already seemed tied at the hip with fair play law, the firm acting as executors for the foreclosure. She needed another firm, but it wasn't like she could explain that to Kangshri. "We need a good firm to handle the scope of the action. Someone strong, with the clout to stand up to our opponent." "We are? You have been on Willist for a few days," Kangshri said cuttingly as she leaned forward, unfolding like a sail. "You appear to be settling in." "It's for the Sasana family. The owner ranch, ma'am. They're in trouble. The spaceport plans to expand out and gut their lands just to build
I am well acquainted with the Sasana family and fully aware of the spaceport's plans, Mr. Sane. The Sasanas are surely aware of them as well. They have been public knowledge for a considerable period of time.
Kang Shui steepled her fingers together.
I am, however, unable to offer my services to the Sasanas. In my capacity as the designated counsel for the city of Vardosh, I must recluse myself.
But they weren't going to foreclose on the Sasana lands before. I called fair play law, and it has something to do with the Navy. They need a barrister to fight it. A good one. It's excessive to any kind of reasonable needs, and we're going to fight it.
You use the word we again.
Kang Shui pursed her lips, folding her hands back over her stomach.
Certainly, fighting the action is your privilege, Mr. Sane, and it will be most interesting to enter into an adversarial relationship with one of my own interns.
Adversarial? Priscilla felt her mouth go dry as the conversation slipped out from under her.
I remain the barrister for the city of Vardosh, Mr. Sane. I am prevented from involvement in planning, but not in matters of litigation.
Priscilla had no choice but to leave. She had spent the rest of the afternoon and all night going through the case files. What, 9 times now? More? It was fast approaching 10 p.m, and she had spent the day staring at the file over and over. With no one willing to take on the case, it looked hopeless. No hunt was ever hopeless. It just needed time, planning, and patience. But as she polished one of her eyeballs, she had to admit the truth. The first part of her contract, eliminating the infant princess, had been easy, with no one suspecting. But then the waiting set in, and Komodri Tasu was becoming tiresome. It wasn't just the woman herself. She viewed Komodri with what almost felt like surprise. For someone with an untreatable case of emotional derealization, the experience was a novelty. The money was well worth her efforts, and this would, without a doubt, be the capstone in her career of choice. Her time setting up a perfect kill would be tangibly rewarded. The tribulations were in the details. She had adopted a persona, the identity of Duktra Bradoon, where she was seldom seen, little regarded, and entirely unquestioned. A business that put her in the Northern Palace, as that was the place with the tightest security. Komodri had a reputation for indulging disreputable personages with lavish entertainments, so she had embedded herself with people who knew the terrain. Her most successful contact had been Pavis Klips Kosreen. While the woman had abominable habits, she had proven to be a natural guide into a world she knew little of and cared nothing about. There were certain elements of the contract that had to be considered. The princesses had to be killed, and while that was a given, the usual requirements, such as making it appear to be an accident, were notably absent. The sole requirement was that it not be traceable back to her employer, a person she'd never seen nor heard save for a voice scrambler. Her employer had been vouched for through her contacts, and the money was generous even for a target of this magnitude. She had no desire to become a liability to anyone with that sort of clout. Then there was the requirement to get away. That meant care, planning, and attention to details. It wasn't enough just to kill Komodri. As a woman surrounded by the security of a palace and frequently accompanied by pods of death's heads, she had to get the woman alone and provide herself an exit. Big game fishing. Well, weirder things had happened, but she never would have expected Kosreen to provide such an outstanding suggestion. Yes, it had been Komodri's words, but a target's habits usually provided the opportunity. Klips had edged the princess right over the edge, and now all she had to do was catch. Or would have. She'd been all set to get her out on the ocean, alone and away from her commandos. Thanks to her overweening ego, ending her would have been child's play. Then a quick call to the employer, finalize her disappearance, and out to the spaceport. By the time anyone noticed the woman was missing, she'd be lifting off on the first ship out of the system. If all worked as it should, no one would look for her as she slipped over the hyperlimit and left the Imperium behind.
But then someone had to go and blow up a damned marina. The interior and the constables were calling it an act of terrorism, and while the perpetrators were reported dead, the interior had still put everyone on notice, which meant the odds of getting Camaldry to sue alone out on the open ocean fell to exactly 0. Fortunately, there were other options. Tom Steinberg sank into the couch with a groan. As Shanky brought him a beer, he reached for the remote and flipped the input over to the news. It was already talking about the terrorist bombing at Harbour Point Marina and Harbour Patrol stops terrorists. There was a terrorist alert, though officials were playing it down as all the perps were dead. Nothing to upset Evrovi. Better yet, nothing about yours truly, and that was just fine. Tom looked over at Pat Veery. Well, where she was hiding. Maybe this hack thing is going to work out. The cat girl was a mass of bruises, but who could tell under all the fur? Right now, she was being eaten by the sofa cushions. She disappeared into the mass, though copper eyes glared at him balefully from the shadows of Avy's favourite throw pillow. Perhaps. Yeah, a third voice butted in, and Tom peered down. Shanky had his beer. Thanks, buddy. Tom picked up the Rhinal, beer and all. As Shanky got comfortable on Tom's lap, he realised who else was there, and dove off with a, yeah! Tom just chuckled. You traumatised the poor guy. Just let me fight him to the death. I'm injured and hungry, Pat Veery grumbled. An arm extended from the mound of cushions to scratch at the air. Combat may not determine who is right, but it always determines who is left. She sounded so indignant, Tom started laughing for real, but then he did a double take. Did you just make a joke? I did not. All we could see were her eyes. She sounded so offended that Tom just laughed harder. Let me die in peace, you perverhagacht. Pat Veery threw a pillow at him as the door opened. You fuck trophy! Dex yelled, as he tornadoed into the room after Shanky. Harry Axewound! Amy yelled after him, laughing all the while. Tom wasn't ready for this, and he did his damnedest not to laugh. Kids! Who taught you to say that? Of course, at the sound of his voice, the two kids turned and looked at him. You did, Daddy. Oh. When had he... Oh, right. When he cursed out that woman and her brood while shopping at Orinka Plaza. In that case, Harry Axewound, fuck trophy, the first one of you to get me some of the Sepultura Mum left in the fridge gets their real name back. If they were up and about, why not? Tom smiled lightly as the pup scampered back upstairs to grab the fabled dish. He'd return the proper names in a little bit. He just wanted the free labour. If anyone had earned the right to be lazy, it was the man and the cat on the couch. It was going to be a decent evening. The whole debacle aside. He wasn't too torn up about the lunatics either. Guns for hire were a half-credit a dozen around spaceports, so that was no loss. The whole thing with Pat Veery surprised him a little. Tom actually liked the kid. Before the Shulvanti arrived, Levi would never have imagined eating out on another planet. Well, not without a spacesuit at least. When he'd been very young, he'd seen a cartoon depicting the Curiosity rover as eventually failing because it was hungry, and he'd imagined going to rescue it with peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. Eating a sandwich for a space helmet had been the engineering problem that had convinced him to scrub the mission at the time. Orinka Plaza, however, was well beyond his wildest imaginings. All the lights of Vegas, all the diversity of Mos Eisley, and all the fun of Disneyland, energized by music that set your toes to tapping. The Shulvanti treated gravity like a minor inconvenience, and the square mile of plaza was over a mile above ground. It was so high up that snow had fallen, and outside the busy clubs and theatres, Helcom and Shulvanti in heavy winter coats ran shrieking through the frozen drifts, or Akiri threw snowballs. He was here for the winter holiday in outer space. It was kind of a Charles Dickens Christmas on acid, but everyone was having fun. Cries of "Joyous if Rovey" filled the air from species he knew, and more he'd never even imagined, much less heard of. Along the rim of the plaza, the lights of the capital stretched out to the horizon beneath them, while off in the distance even taller towers reached up toward the stars. He knew he was staring in every direction, but so were lots of folks. For a moment, he really wanted a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. Their hosts had steered them towards a busy nightclub, with the expectation of a serious meal, and they sat down at an enormous booth with a round table. While lights strode all around them from the party, the table was surrounded by some kind of sonic privacy curtain that deadened the deafening sound off the dance floor. Riala and Melody grinned conspiratorially as the group deposited their coats and bags at the table. "Oh, Levi!" Riala sang out, putting on a coy expression. "We were wondering." Melody stepped close and looked up at him through her lashes. "Would you like to come dance with us?" Vadim cleared his throat. Even in the strobing club lights, the poor man's cheeks were flush blue, but he seemed to be wearing his best professional smile, like a shield at the moment. "May I suggest that we order first?" He prodded the tabletop, which flickered to life, showing digital menus at each place setting. "We are on a bit of a schedule." Riala punched in orders of pan-seared turoks for the two of them, then grabbed his hand as she strode out of the table's enclosure. "I'll warm him up for you, Mel." Levi saw Melondi blush while Melody grinned and winked, before the crowd swallowed them up, and the music swept them away. It had taken him a while to learn couples dancing, Shorvanti style, but for 3 or more folks it really worked. Riala moved him into an open promenade as they moved onto the dance floor, and they settled the 6-count close basic. The music was bright and cheery, and the tempo was quick enough that he was pretty sure she wouldn't last long if they went too crazy. A few seconds later, he spotted Melody making her way through the crowd, and signaled to Riala. She spun him out into a throw-out, where he reached out and caught Melody's hand, bringing her with him as Riala brought him back. He turned so that his back was to his Shorvanti wife, feeling her hands on his hips guiding him as their steps synchronized, his focus shifting to Melody. Grinning, he brought her into a close tuck-in turn, careful not to step on Riala's toes as he did so. Space had begun to open up around them as the trio wheeled around each other. He could hear Riala's heavy breathing behind him and lined up a few seconds' respite for her. He signaled to Melody, and the two humans pirouetted away, orbiting the Shorvanti woman like twin planets. Levi winked up at her as he let his fingers trail across her stomach. They both caught her hands in a double swing out, into a seesaw kind of thing, as each human took a turn leaning out for a low dip, before the other two pulled them back upright. The music seemed to be winding down, and Riala nodded to Melody. The human woman did what almost looked like a cartwheel into the Shorvanti woman's arms, and Riala hoisted her into an inverted lift. As the music struck the height of its final crescendo, Levi took hold of Riala's shoulders and stepped up into her thigh. The 3 of them formed a sort of misshaped star, with Melody's toes pointed at the ceiling, Levi's right hand and foot splayed out, and Riala holding them both aloft. Levi caught Melody as Riala let her down, giving her a quick peck on the lips as he set her on her feet. Riala grinned down at him and shook her head. "What is it?" Levi cocked his head. "Is something wrong?" "Same thing it always is, hot stuff." Riala bent down and kissed him. "You're kind of amazing, is all." Levi barked a laugh and turned back toward their table. There had been some applause when the music died down, but he hadn't really been paying attention. Now the number of golden eyes on him suddenly felt enormous. Swallowing hard, he squared his shoulders and began striding through the crowd. He nearly made it when a woman in a familiar gold-trimmed purple uniform stepped in front of him. "Good evening," the interior agent said with a confident smile. "Oh boy." Levi fished his omnipad out of his pants pocket. "I'm sorry, what are you doing?" "Nothing. Can I help you, ma'am? The woman gave a mew as Riala arrived and stepped up beside him.
Surely I'm not old enough to warrant a ma'am, am I?
It's the uniform, ma'am, I'm sure, Riala said, her smile neutral. Definitely the uniform, Melody said from his other side.
Ah, right.
The agent's smile faltered, then she rallied, beaming down at him.
I wanted to invite you and your girlfriends?
Wives? Both girls corrected in unison, as they moved slightly in front of him.
Wives?
She acknowledged them both with a gracious nod.
Back to my table. Perhaps we could all get to know each other a bit better?
I'm afraid not. Riala gave an apologetic smile. We're here with friends and have plans for the rest of the night, but thank you.
Surely they would understand.
The agent spread her hands in an eloquent shrug. There are so many benefits to be gained from knowing people who are well connected.
There's quite an offer, miss.
Melody stepped in front of Levi, forcing the agent to look down at her. The agent blinked.
Ahijo Rindax at your service.
The agent's smile went a bit crooked. Forgive me, but...
Wife?
How old are you? Riala casually leaned one elbow on Melody's shoulder.
She's 15. We've been married almost 3 years now.
Melody crossed her arms over her chest, looking right at home in front of Riala.
That's right, so thank you, but we really can't. Sorry.
Of course. So sorry. The agent's smile turned frosty. With all these wild parties going on, we've had no end of mint infractions, people disturbing the peace. Let's hope nothing spoils the rest of your evening. It'd be such a shame if I had to take you all in for questioning. And there it is. Levi watched as the agent stalked away and sat down in a smaller booth across the room. Shaking his head, he covered the last few yards to their booth and slid into the seat. Even on Shield, the interior is a menace. Malondi, Desi, and Vadim, who started enthusiastically plying Riala and Melody with questions about their performance on the dance floor, all fell silent and stared at him. Desi seemed to recover first.
A menace, what?
Levi jerked a thumb at the crowd as he sat down to his dinner. Just had an interior Asian threaten to arrest us suspicious humans because he wouldn't join her for the evening. Wouldn't have anything to do with me not wanting to get a little cozy with her, of course.
Malondi's jaw dropped. There's no way that's true.
Maybe it's not, Levi shrugged, and slid his omnipad across the table. Maybe you can tell me.
You recorded her?
Malondi asked in surprise. The Shilvanti and the Pezrin girl crowded in and watched the interaction play out, turning up the volume to max and playing the last line several times.
Polite and reasonable,
Zinshiki announced, scooting back to her seat.
She didn't bite your neck.
Levi stared.
Human humor, she said flatly. It is a difficult concept. Ignore her. She hasn't eaten yet. Desi winced. And no, definitely not polite. Guys always had to be careful around that sort, though the interior didn't visit my part of town very often.
Why were you recording in the first place? Malondi demanded, a troubled expression knitting her brow. You could get into trouble for recording people without their permission, or an agent in pursuit of her duties. She was pursuing something, all right, Levi snorted. I will never not record the interior. There's a fair chance it saved my life already.
I don't believe I'm hearing this,
Malondi exclaimed, scowling as she shook her head.
Levi, the interior exists to enforce the law. They're here to help.
Oh, you want to see the kind of help the interior offered me? After nodding for Riala to help block the view from the crowd, Levi unbuttoned his shirt and handed it to Melody.
Levi!
Vadim's voice pitched up an octave.
What are you...
Don't worry, I'll keep it decent. Swirling around in the booth, he climbed onto his knees so his back was above the level of the tabletop, then tugged the back of his undershirt up to his shoulders. Even with the strobing club lights, he knew what they would see better than the backs of his own hands. Long scars that crisscrossed his back, the work of a whip and the hands of a zealot. The gasps and ohs by the goddess were about what he'd come to expect. Vadim wheezing for breath was pretty unsurprising. Zinshiki's comment on tenderizing was not, and he wasn't sure if she was joking this time. Sure, he'd felt like a piece of meat before, but never quite that literally. After all these years, the Shovanti didn't seem so alien. Zinshiki, on the other hand, it was one thing to find out she ate with the cannibal option on the menu, but in his wildest imaginings, he wouldn't have expected the Persian to be... "Ick," she muttered, looking at his back intently while carving her Turok steak like a disapproving surgeon. A fussy eater. Still, they'd all been having a great night until then, and now ick was a pretty fair description of his mood. He'd gotten used to all the petty stuff over the years, but now and then it was still hard to be resigned to it when someone got in your face. See, this is what the interior gave you a nerve for digging a swimming hole when you weren't supposed to. Levi let the shirt drop and began tucking it back into his pants. Could have been undone in a long day's work, but back in those days, we didn't have rights, or know if we were ever going to have them again. Anyways, the agent threatened to lock me up for 5 years before things got back under control, so no, I'm going to keep on recording all the same. Levi turned back around and slid down into his seat. The faces that greeted him echoed many that had come before. Shock, horror, a tinge of sadness, perhaps, and lurking under it all, revulsion. Poor Vadim looked like he'd lost any appetite he'd had. Zinshiki licked her fingers thoughtfully. "My father, Professor Warwick, he's told us things." Desi laid a hand on Melondi's shoulder. "The interior had pulled him in for questioning when he met me there. I just thank the goddess that my mother was there for him, but you do hear of things going wrong." "People always talk, but so did the painters and Professor Zarin. Bad things, but good things too," Melondi said quietly. She'd avoided his eyes since he'd taken his shirt off. Vadim had taken it the worst, though. No one likes the interior at his worst, but the thing no one talks about is how much they're needed at their best. There was nothing needed about what happened to Levi. Melody hissed in a little intake of breath. The situation had already been resolved. The interior was stretched thin. They were terrorists with nuclear weapons. Riala's lips tightened. "But I saw the woman that did this. It was just terrible, all of it." "When you got those scars..." Desi looked at him narrowly. "Were you doing what you thought was right, Levi?" "I was. I'm not some kind of thug, Desi, misspending my youth." Levi finished with his overshirt and settled back. "I made sure no one else would get hurt, and I'd do it again." "Did things come out all right in the end? For you? For your town?" "They did, but it was a close thing." Desi cocked her head and brushed back the hair on her neck to reveal a medical port at the base of her skull. "You have scars you could get rid of and haven't. I take this out and I'm a quadriplegic." Levi blinked. "If it's a contest, you win. I ain't trying to say I have it worse. I'm trying to say the problem isn't being addressed." Levi shot Vadim an apologetic look. The man was still staring like he'd grown another head. "I was some kind of thug, according to my co-mothers. I didn't have a youth to misspend, but I got this doing what I thought was right, and I'd do it again too." Desi's gaze was flat and expressionless. "I'm saying you don't have to keep that to remember." "Would you have cared if I hadn't?" Levi bit out. It wasn't quite an accusation of wearing his scars like a trophy. He pushed the thought aside, trying to see it from her eyes. "So not everyone's perfect? Sometimes even good intentions go wrong? We get that." "Good point, but no." Desi picked through her words. "You and I have both had tectonic shifts in our lives, and luck aside, we made them happen. It's too easy for people like the interior to equate being disenfranchised with being powerless, to just accept the low bar. My point is, it's not only about overcoming, it's also about healing. Gradually. Not overnight or easily, but healing." The table was quiet with tension as Levi looked at Desi. What had his life been like before? He'd never thought himself a prize, but now he had Melody and Ree. A good business working the farm. Friends. How long has she been injured? They said it was just a few weeks. No. It was her parents she was talking about, not her accident. Every day I see all sorts of people from all walks of life, Vadim said quietly. People don't think about how they act when they think no one is looking. They don't see that their opinions of the world are also a confession of their character. Well, those are fair points too. Levi reached out, took his wife's hands and gave Desi a slow smile. Sorry about your folks before. Guess I was pretty fortunate. Man taught me about trying to love and understand before you judge. Never thought I'd put it to use with aliens on another planet. It's all right. Vadim offered a smile. We all start off as aliens to each other. Levi returned the smile. Sorry if I've been unduly rude. I've had this conversation so many times and I never know how I should... Levi felt his stomach sink as he spotted Agent Rindax heading toward their table. She was flanked by two other women, both in the uniform of the interior. God damn it. Here it comes. The others barely had time to follow his gaze. Good evening. The agent on the right addressed the table. We've heard reports of illicit substances being distributed by a human in the area. The agent on the left nodded. I'm afraid we're going to need to search everyone's belongings. Unless... Agent Rindax smiled at the free Shorvanti across the table from the two humans. Perhaps one of you could tell us if anyone here is in possession of the narcotic known as mint. Levi rested his forehead on the table and heaved a sigh, while Riala and Melody glared daggers at the agents. Vadim shrank back in his seat. Desi stared, slack-jawed. Melondi's jaw was clenched as she drummed her fingers on the tabletop. Zinchiki stole something off Desi's plate. Alright, do your thing, I guess. Levi gave a hopeless shrug. State-sponsored sexual harassment? Here we come. That's a very serious accusation to make. Agent Rindax looked down at him imperiously, the ghost of a smile tugging at her lips. No, hold on! Belondi burst out indignantly. You know very well that he should be searched by a male officer. One of the agents turned to regard the girl. You his barrister, young lady? Well, no, but... Then keep quiet, or you'll be held for interfering with an ongoing investigation. Melondi spotted indignantly, but before the agent had the chance to say anything further, another Shorvanti woman approached from the side. Pardon me, officer? The woman held what looked like a wallet open for the agent to read. I believe you dropped this. The agent glanced down at the object, then did a double take. She frowned down at the object, then up at the woman, then nudged the other two, who repeated the process almost perfectly. The three agents exchanged pale glances, nodded to the new woman, then turned and strode away without a word. The stranger followed. Levi was the first to break the silence. What in the hell just happened? I saw nothing, said Zinchiki. Are you done with that? Didn't see a thing, nodded Desi. Melondi was holding Vadim's hand and Levi stared at Ree and Melody. He was about to speak when... There you are! Good dinner for Letzi and us, plus snacks! Kamara beamed as she reached their booth. The pair had gone to a takeout place next door and were back with bags in hand. At least they had name tags on. Her sister beamed. Yeah! Mara and I are going to murder them all and take their boyfriends! Levi felt the walls spin around him. Ick. It was barely past 3 when Letzi made it to Orinka Stadium. The first round in the Galaxy Conquest Ultimate Tournament wouldn't be for hours yet, but there were preliminary events to deal with, and they needed a here and now. There would be time afterward for catching up with the others. Parties were already in full swing all through the district, and everyone would have fun. It was time to get her head in the game. People thronged the gallery, though at the attendance booth you could log in with complete privacy. Mixing your real name and your team identity was strictly taboo. Moreover, it was forbidden by the rules unless you were part of the pro teams. Those made up a maximum of half the tourney, and right now they were off at their recruiting booths, showing off with men in scanty versions of their team uniforms. Letzi entered her ID, and the terminal recognized her as a Sector Commodore of the Imperial faction, asked for her preferred game mode and any special requests. She'd come with the Kerbal sisters, and entered her request to draw Team Ice into her flotilla. It wasn't a sure thing, but the odds were still good since she allocated match points for the request. She offset the cost of her request by selecting Confront mode. Most commanders would go with Assault mode. Confront still set her in an attack posture instead of defense, but without the deployment initiative or a force advantage. At least she could select the star system attacked. It was like a sortie with poor intel, and the defender would meet there with equal forces, or better if their commander managed their points well. That had been an hour ago, and after the announcers pumped up the crowd in the main auditorium, the big screens had flashed up as the matchmaker announced the listings for round 1. Sector 2, Confront. Map, Open Sector Assault. Ship Tier, 6. Team 1, Consortium. Ground Commander, the Angriest Peltha. Fleet Commander, Burning Chrome. Team 2, Imperial. Ground Commander, Imperial Houts. Fleet Commander, Obsidian Syndrome. The matchmaker listed her team and designated a hall for their planning session. The first round was crucial. The second would drop teams down to 3 sectors, and the finals would pull them down to 1. The teams would win or lose, but the MM populated winners by best scores, not process of elimination. The qualifier turned the matches into bloody gore-fests that were popular with the crowd, as shooters down on the planets battled for control, while fleet battles lent their support. All vied for the solar system. That gave her time to meet up with everyone in Hall 9 and log in. There were spectator seats above, but the pods were sealed. Even here identities were secret, but she looked over the other women milling around the room. Mostly Shorvanti, but there were 5 Rakiri, one of whom had to be Imperial Houts. A couple of women were older, and judging by their builds, they might be real Marines. Here and there were a couple of Helcom girls, and even one Shorvanti guy, who glared lasers at any woman who came near. Overall, it was just a big meet and greet, as everyone watched the clock or looked over the game pods. Altogether, there were 72 in the room, with half a team and the other half of her fleet. It was likely that no one knew anyone else in the hall, and Letzi wished the twins luck as they took the pause next to hers. Looking back to the crowd, she spotted her friends in the gallery. They'd have been harder to pick out except for the flutter around the humans. She waved, before trying to put them out of her mind. Stepping inside and sitting in her pod blocked the clamour of music, the crowd, the announcers, and sealed herself in the blissful silence. The gaming rig inside was standard for everyone, and she took a few moments to set up her favourite control layout. Satisfied, she pulled up the sector map, initializing her voice scrambler by selecting Default Vatica, Female, and logged into chat. She'd already reviewed the star systems available in the vast expanse of Sector 2, and she had a plan.